That's really my only job today. I've had the pleasure for a number of years of working with Alan and Tariq with the Public Policy Center on these By the People projects. I'm a huge believer in this process of making every attempt to get input from people who normally don't have an opportunity to step into the political and governmental and policy-making process and hear from folks. If you have not been involved in something like this before, this is going to be a great day for you. It's really fascinating. I find it, you know, you've got over 100 people, somewhere between 100 and 150 people, who are here on a really nice Saturday to participate in a full-day discussion about budget issues, which I think raises the question, what kind of freaks are you people? This is just really disturbing that you'd give up a perfectly good day to come in here and do this. That said, this is essential for the workings of, forgive me for getting a little high-handed, but for democracy, but certainly for the city of Lincoln. This is an essential part of this process. About a year ago, I had the opportunity to moderate something very similar to this, and talking about budget issues on a much broader basis. This is some nitty-gritty stuff. These are very difficult, real-world choices that you're going to be making, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But the one thing I can assure you, as somebody that's not affiliated with the City of Lincoln, but involved in this process, is this is going to make a difference. What you're saying here today is going to translate into some actual very difficult choices in the months to come. That said, the guy who's going to be ultimately responsible for a lot of these choices, and by the end of the year you're going to love him, you're going to hate him, no matter what, he's the mayor of the city of Lincoln, Chris Beitler.
Good morning to everybody. Bill describes himself as the guy that keeps everything on time. I'm in that category of persons that tends to make everything get behind time by talking too much, but I'm going to try to not do that this morning because this is such an important meeting. You shouldn't go to such great lengths to describe that nice weather out there. I saw 12 people push back their chairs, and it came very close to abandoning the project, Bill. But I do want to thank you for being here and for this particular sacrifice on your part. And let me say to you that we pay attention to the results of what's done both on the broad survey and on this in-depth piece that you're doing for us today. And personally, in examining last year's in-depth piece, I found that to be an enormously valuable mechanism for determining not only how people think about it, but more importantly, why they think that way and how the particular subject on the budget fits back into the psyche and the meaning of city government and our community to so many people. We will be paying a lot of attention to this. Doug Emery, one of our current city council persons, great city council person, and a new city council person who will start with her duties next week, Jane Snyder. Would both of you stand? They're here today. Thank you for being here. I don't often tell personal stories, and that's a merciful thing as far as you all are concerned. My staff would tell you that. But I do need to relate to you that Judy and I are moving to a new home. Yesterday was the day that two men in a truck came and we packed all of these dozens and dozens and dozens of boxes. and and loaded them all up in the truck and took them to our new home, but that was eventually when we got done after midnight, and so we didn't get a chance to look into too many boxes, trusting that they all were properly marked. But I discovered that my wife, Judy, who I didn't want to wake this morning, and the two men with the truck had conspired to mislabel the box that had all of my pants in them. So not only does the emperor occasionally not have no clothes, but the mayor on this occasion had no pants. And for an hour this morning, I was going through these boxes, which are much easier to tape up than they are to untape, looking for at least a single pair of pants. And the whole thing illustrated to me that there are certain essentials to public appearances that are not incorporated in your remarks as such, and that you don't always have the luxury of simply focusing on the script that's been given to you. The reason for relaying it to you being simply, you know, really what you're here about today is to focus on the essentials of city government and what it means and what it takes to have a decent city government. And by a decent city government, I mean a city government that's effective, efficient, for the purpose of leading this community forward in continuing to be one of the great communities of this nation, and incorporating or not incorporating bigger visions for the future, and identifying and talking about what it takes in terms of resources if you want a particular kind of vision. And that's why this sort of thing is so interesting, is because we begin to see what the visions are, how big or how small they are, and how much people are willing to put in to that particular size vision that they have. Sometimes, you know, the effect of what you're doing is immediately obvious. There's big things that affect the development of a community, locating the Capitol here or building South Point Mall. You know, things that are obvious and have an obvious impact. And then there are other things that happen over time, like our annual budget process. And year in and year out, it may not have a profound effect on your children and your grandchildren. But let me tell you clearly that the decisions that have been made the last couple of years and that will be made in the next couple of years as we decide how we're going to come through this recession may have a large impact on the future. And let me just talk about that a little bit. When we completed the 2008 and 2009 budget, we had high hopes that we had finally achieved an ongoing balance between the growth of revenues in the city and the growth of expenditures. Previous to that time, the city's budget was badly out of balance. It was structurally deficient. But all of the work and the sacrifice of the past two budget years, we thought would finally yield results this year. Then the national recession hit, and people stopped spending as the bottom came out of the housing market. Our already stagnant sales tax revenues declined further. I think most of you realize from previous discussions that the sales tax and the property tax are the two key revenue components for financing city government. But the sales tax now is currently $1 million under projections and is actually will end up this year under the total of last year's collection. So it'll be the first time in anybody's memory that the sales tax has been less than the year before for a long time. The housing crisis will show itself in this spring's property reassessment. Lower values will reduce the city's total property tax revenue for the first time in modern history. And then changes in the legislature at both levels to deal with the national recession, on balance, have overall further reduced city revenues. A near-perfect fiscal storm has in fact materialized from the culmination of these events. I have led major reorganization efforts in each of the last two previous budgets that I have presented. We have reduced city government by 115 jobs in the last 2 years, but we cannot achieve a whole lot more in short order under the category of efficiency gains. Our options are fewer to deal with the aftermath of this national recession. I need the community to understand that this year the budget stakes are higher than ever. The choices we make will have a real impact on the kind of city we will be 20 years down the road. People must be fully aware of and willing to build a consensus around whatever budget choices we make this summer. The choices before us involve important community services that are valued by many. If the community is unwilling to financially support these services, they must understand that many services we take for granted will not survive. Especially since the 2009-2010 budget will have a big impact on our future, we must look at it together. It is not a circumstance where elected officials simply make choices in a vacuum, because the choices will have such a striking impact. We need our citizens to make their vision for Lincoln's future clear and to weigh in on those choices. And that's why you're here today. We need your help in determining the choices for Lincoln's future. Today's session will provide a more in-depth look at those choices and help us dig deeper into what citizens want and how much they are willing to pay. You will examine the same facts that we examine as elected officials. You will be asked to make the same tough choices. As you know from the online survey, the choices are not easy. The choices discussed in the survey may lead to a very different Lincoln. Our city may not be as green. Our children may have fewer opportunities. Some safety services may no longer be offered. And the health of many may not be as strong. But the other alternative is no easier. Our citizens may choose to devote more of their hard-earned income to these city services, but that's a difficult proposition as unemployment grows, retirement incomes dwindle, and we wait and wait for the national recession to dwindle. Whatever you choose today, I want you to truly know how grateful I am that you've come together to participate and that you're willing to participate in the shaping of this budget. Your choices will indeed provide valuable input on how we move forward as a community, and I'm confident that by sitting down here today, we can find the right path for Lincoln and for the generations that will call Lincoln home in the future. So I look forward to your input, and Mr. Kelly, I hope you can keep everything on time.
I'll do my best.
Thank you.
And thank you, Mayor Beitler, if for nothing else, wearing pants. We're more alarmed that he's wearing his wife's shoes this morning as well. Not every man could carry off that look, but in all seriousness, I think the mayor did a very nice job of laying out just how serious your responsibilities are going to be today. You're going to hear this a lot about my role in trying to keep things on time, and we're going to move things right along. The other thing that is truly my main responsibility is to make sure, by keeping things on time, that we hear from as many of you as possible before the day is out, either through the representatives of the groups or from you individually as well. And throughout the day, we're going to be giving you a number of other ways besides participating in this event where you can have direct input to city officials and your elected officials as well. Right now, the most important thing is to actually get the information that you're going to be dealing with. This is kind of Budget 101. This is the learning part. My responsibilities are one thing. You guys have responsibilities as well, and frankly, that's to do your homework, and this is the homework part. Really need to encourage you to pay attention to the information that's going to be presented and absorb a little bit of it and bring it into your groups as well. The city's Chief of Staff, Rick Hoppy, is here, and Steve Hubka, City Budget Officer, and they're the people that know the most about what it is you're going to be dealing with. Here they are now. Thank you.
Good morning. Okay, Chief of Staff. I'm going to tell you a little bit about my job so you can get some background as to why we're going to do this. Basically, the Chief of Staff and the mayoral office, we do all we can to make sure the mayor has all the things that he needs to get through the day and all the information he needs to make decisions. And it isn't always him telling you what it is as much as you kind of seeing what's going on. And I think we all learned a new duty today, staff. And by the way, city staff, could you raise your hand so people know who you are today? We have a number of fine people here from our city directors, and they're going to be answering a lot of your questions today. Okay, but I think what we learned today is that no speech, no public appearance document can go out that doesn't have 2 words at the very front, and it's locate pants. Okay, so now on, when it comes across my desk, that had better happen. Yeah, it's hard to believe the University of Nebraska did not prepare me for that part of this. So we need to give you a little background information, give you a little bit of the information that we see every day and have to experience in making the choices that we do on the budget. I'm the mayor's primary aide in the office in terms of the budget, and so I want to go through with you some of the information that we're going to do. You are going to be given 6 questions today in your groups, and there are 6 questions from the survey. Not all of you will be familiar with all 6 of those questions because you got kind of a random sample when you did the survey, or it would have taken hours for you to complete. But those 6 questions are predicated on a bunch of background information that you need to know, which obviously wasn't available in the format in which we did it online. So today our effort is to try to give you the same information that we see as we ask you to make the same decisions that we make on the budget. So we put together a little slideshow for you, and Mr. Hubka is also going to jump in here and correct me when I make mistakes, and I'm sure that will be early and often. We're going to start out here a little bit with one of our important revenue sources. The city is dependent on the sales tax. The city gets a portion of the sales tax that you pay whenever you buy goods and services. And this is an historical look at what is happening with our sales tax. Now, you see that 1994 was really a good year. We had sales tax increases from the year previous of almost 12%. And as you look at those bars across the graph, you can see that we did really well in the 1990s. Sales tax every year got a healthy boost. In large part, the city of Lincoln was underserved in retail sectors in the 1990s. We hadn't opened South Point pavilions yet. We still didn't have Walmarts. North 27th Street hadn't completely developed. And a lot of the dollars that were going to Omaha and Lincoln now are coming back into our community, and we're spending them in town, and it's really reflected here. Well, that starts to level off, as you notice, as we get to the new century. And we had a couple of good years in there, but by about 2006, 2005, you notice, this is starting to level off. Okay, and our sales tax growth is now starting to be less than 1% in 2006. It goes backwards in 2007. We have a pretty decent year in 2008. And then the national recession hits. And we're not alone. This is happening all over the United States. But now we're projecting that year to date, we're going to be a full percentage point under where we were the year previous. So an important revenue source is not flattening out. It's starting to go backwards. Okay? Steve, could you go to the next slide, please? Another important source of income for us is the property tax. Now, your property tax and the amount of money we get is determined by 2 factors, as you're probably all well aware. One of them is the levy we set. In other words, the government sets a certain amount that we want you to pay per valuation. The other one, obviously, is the valuation. The value of your home or your business determines, in part, how much revenue the city receives. Here again, you're seeing the trends that we're seeing. And the overall property tax base for the city is growing in the early part of the new century at around 4% or more. It's starting to slide down there a little bit as you move closer to the end of the decade. And now, in facing the 2009-2010 budget, which begins September 1st, we're facing something that has never happened. With the collapse of the real estate market due to the national recession, you've seen that valuations are actually going to be less than they were last year. Now, for those of you whose house went down a little bit, that is good news, but for city government, that isn't such good news. That means that we're going to have less revenue than we did years previous unless we raise the levy to account for that. So you've got two trends with a couple of big revenue sources for us. They were flattening and now they're declining. Steve, I'll get you to go to the next one, please. Okay, and this graph illustrates why that's kind of a big deal to us. If you look, you can see here that sales tax is 42% of the tax-funded portion of the budget, and that the property tax is around 30.6%. And when I speak of the tax-funded portion of the budget, that's the portion of the budget that pays for things like police, fire, libraries, parks, and a number of other services. So what you can see here is that almost 3/4 of the revenue that we count on to provide our most basic services are in decline. You have a number of other services which are a little more stable. We have a telecommunications occupation tax, the motor vehicle tax, permits and fees. We do collect a little money from you all for some of the services we provide in the tax-funded budget, fees for service, permits, etc., so forth. So that's kind of the picture you have here on our revenue sources. Okay. Now, many of you hopefully understand this and probably do, because I'm sure you pay close attention when the assessor sends a statement, that this tends to show you what the impact of our property taxes are on the individual taxpayer. For an average home in Lancaster County, which is around $150,000, I think is the median price, this is the amount of property taxes in which you're paying. You pay about $3,000 total, of which the City of Lincoln gets around $430, which is about 14% of the take. Now, if you're like me and you pay an escrow and do it month to month, that works out to around $36 a month, again, to provide those services like police, fire, 911, etc. So this gives you kind of an indication of the decisions we make and its impact on you as individual homeowners. Go ahead, Steve. And forgive me, I got the unenviable task of getting 40 minutes worth of information in about 10 minutes. So if I'm going really fast and you're not following here, wave at me. This gives kind of a longer-term view of our city property tax rate. As I said earlier, the two factors in what determines your property taxes are the valuation and the rate that we charge. This shows you what's been going on since 1992. Now you see that the high point here for us was in 1994, where the levy for the City of Lincoln was 52 cents. But remember, from the last graph that you saw on the city sales tax, we were doing pretty well there. So we were starting to accumulate excess revenue. And I think the decision was made at the time that we'd go ahead and drop the levy so that we weren't taking in all of this money that we didn't necessarily need for the programs that we were providing, okay? So the levy starts to go down pretty significantly. But as you look down the graph, you see that it levels out and even drops a couple of years in here. In short, we haven't raised the levy as a city for anything except voter-approved bonds since 1994, around 15 years. Okay, so your levy has remained pretty constant. In fact, we've even dropped it a couple of times during that period as your valuation has gone up, so that we brought in the same or close to the same amount of overall property tax dollars. Okay? This is sort of problematic for us in that, as you can see, when we dropped the levy, we were doing real well on sales tax, okay? But now the levy's flattened out and we're not doing so well on sales tax. So our numbers, the indicators for our revenue situation are not moving in a fairly positive direction for the city. Go ahead, Steve. You know, one of the things we have to keep in mind as we set the tax rates that you pay is, are we competitive with our peers? And this is a graph that shows the top 10 cities in the state of Nebraska in terms of population and what their levy is. Our levy is 28.8 cents. Of those top 10 cities, that puts us in 7th. We have the fourth lowest but 7th highest of that group. And if you look at the ones behind us, Kearney, Norfolk, and Grand Island. I think Grand Island got cut off here. It's on your paper anyway, I hope. And we're having a little software glitch, but bear with us, okay? They don't necessarily provide all the services that we do in the city of Lincoln. And really, what I like to point out to people, because, you know, as Alan mentioned, we're always in competition with Omaha, trying to do the best we can. Omaha's levy, as witnessed here, is 42 cents. But to make an apples-to-apples comparison with us, our levy has our StarTran, our bus service in it, okay? Omaha's does not, because they have a separate authority. If you add the 2 cents they get for that, their levy's around 44 cents. Now, just to give you some perspective, if our levy was 44 cents, we'd have an additional $24 million a year. And the conversation we'd have today would be a lot different. It would probably be a lot more about where we're going to locate our next fire station, whether we're going to add police officers, what we're going to do and where we're going to build roads. But the point is that we're making do with quite a bit less than other communities with which we compete. Steve? This is just kind of a brief one we're not going to spend a lot of time on, but it tells you where all the money is going. Now, most of the talk today is going to be about the tax-funded operating budget, which is kind of generally known as the general fund. It's about $135 million, and that's where your property and sales tax are going each and every year, and that was the graph we looked at earlier. But there's also some other monies that we get, and obviously there's the non-tax funded operating budget, and that tends to be money that has really limited use. That's usually user fee generated. When you pay your water and wastewater bill, that money goes into that fund. When you go to building and safety, if you're a developer or you're adding on to your house and you have to pay those permit fees, that goes in that fund. Obviously, we have really limited uses on that money. We can't use that money for other things, okay? It has to stay there. It's segregated from the rest of the things we do. Our capital improvement program is federal and state monies, some wheel tax monies that go to the budget with which we build and fix things. If we put up a fire station, we build a road, we repave your street, it comes out of that budget. It's impacted by the tax-funded budget because generally we move money over into the CIP to try to accomplish these things. But we've fallen on a little bit of hard times, and you can see from this chart that last year that tiny little sliver you see in there was the amount of the tax-funded budget we put in the building or capital budget, which was only about $98,000. Steve, you haven't corrected me yet. I can't be doing this well. Okay, well, good start here. Where these dollars are going by department is the subject of this next slide, and we've kind of ordered it in terms of who gets the most, but we've also kind of divided it in terms of the area it goes to. If you look at the top here, our good friend Tom Cassidy, the police chief, is getting about 27% of our tax-funded budget as a department. His colleague, Mr. Ford, our fire chief, is getting about 18%. Now, we've placed two other categories under those two so that we can give you an idea of how much our tax-funded budget is supporting our public safety portion, okay? One of them is the 911 center, obviously the emergency calls that you make for service. The other is what we'd call other public safety services, our contributions to the court, civil protective custody, incarceration, things of that nature. When you add all those pieces up, our total safety and security budget is around 50% of our tax-funded budget. That's going to make more sense in a minute. It's a really key point as we move forward. You see below what the other departments consume as a percentage of that tax-funded budget. Parks gets about 9% of the take at the high end, and at the low end, our friends in building safety are scraping by with about 0.2% of our general fund. They get some other monies from fees that we talked about earlier. The miscellaneous budgets in the CIP takes care of contributions we make that generally aren't fitting into a budget category that makes a lot of sense in the departments. Miscellaneous budgets are things like the money we give to nonprofits to do our human services, the money we give to the Lincoln Partnership for Economic Development to do economic development, obviously, and things like the 4th of July celebration the city does. That's the miscellaneous budgets, okay? Now, the reason that I bring to your attention the divide between public safety and the rest is this. When our revenues aren't keeping pace, we go to our department heads when we're putting together a budget and we say to them, okay, this is the amount of money we have based on what we have last year. Your costs continue to increase, but we're going to have you come in at a percentage of budget below 100% in order to make the budget where we need it to be. So in other years, we've given 96%. One year we did 94%. This year, with our revenue situation, the directions our directors got were to come in with a 91% budget of last year, okay? In previous years, we've made the decision to hold public safety services harmless to some degree. When I say harmless, we've left them at 100%. That doesn't mean they haven't taken cuts. They have. They haven't kept up with growth. Their costs have increased, and they've had to make some reductions to do that, okay? But for more or less, we've kept in that 100% and above range. That means if you're one of those mathematician types, and I'm not necessarily, that if you're asking 50% of the budget not to take that 9%, that's going to move down to the other half of the budget, okay? So you've doubled the hit to everyone else if you hold public safety harmless. So, Steve, could you go back one more second? So here's the point we'll make. If you have to come in at 91% for a tax-funded budget, and you'd say we were just going to eliminate departments to do it, you'd have to end the Parks Department. If we took everything down from finance through building and safety off this list, we're still not at 91%. So, I mean, that's kind of a sobering little thought there for many of you, I'm sure. And that's why the mayor doesn't get to do this slideshow. His aide gets to. So, you can go to the next one, Steve. This just reiterates what I said. And I think there's the key point out of this one is of that 50%, or $67 million, property taxes, our most stable funding source, come in at about $54 million. So property taxes aren't even covering our public safety services, okay? We've got to go for other taxes to get that. Go ahead, Steve. Okay, how have we dealt with this? You heard the mayor talk about how in the last 2 budget cycles we've cut 115 jobs, primarily through reorganizations to become more efficient. Public Works, Greg McLean, our director over there, did a fantastic job of trying to get more with less. Our friend Lynn Johnson in Parks did a great job doing some reorganization. But the truth of the matter is that only goes so far, and there have been service cuts. And that has led to about a $3 million reduction in the tax fund. Go ahead, Steve. This chart, unfortunately, is, wow, the software really got that. Okay, pay attention to the paper in front of you or you're never going to be able to follow this. But this gives us an idea of what the impacts, the cuts have been in terms of the people that you depend on to deliver the services, okay? If you look in the left column where it says fire, police, and 911 employees, you see that from 1990 to the year present, that we've had about a 25% increase in our public safety employees. Now, that isn't quite accurate in that you got to consider during that period, we took over the ambulance service, and so that inflated that figure a little bit. It wasn't just natural growth, okay? We had to put people on to run the ambulances. Now, if you look at the next column right next to it, it says all other city employees, okay? And this is where the rubber hits the road a little bit. You see, in 1990 to today, we actually have 4.5% fewer employees than we did in 1990. Obviously, technology's played a role in that. With computers, you can obviously do more with less, and certainly that's played part of it. But it's also illustrative of the fact that we've cut the budget pretty significantly in terms of services in that time period. Now, if you compare that to the 2 figures on the right side of the graph, Lincoln's population and our growth in area, you see that at the same time we were making do with about 4.5% fewer employees. The population of our city grew 25%, and the area of our city grew 40%. So we took on major new commitments in terms of new parkland, new facilities, new programs to cover this area while at the same time doing it with fewer employees. While technology took care of some of this during the 90s, it isn't helping us quite as much now because obviously technology requires investment. And our budget has been such lately that we haven't been able to invest in that to the degree we have been in the past. You know, one of the jokes, kind of morbid jokes that go around City Hall is we have the best technology that money can buy in 1995. We're pretty out of date on a number of things, and that's an issue that we're going to have to address as we move forward. So go ahead, Steve. Now, you've heard about the revenue side of this. What causes our costs to go up? Well, obviously, labor is one of them. The cost of paying salaries and benefits to our employees, in fact, is about 70% of the cost of your government at this point. We have 6 employee unions that cover the approximately 2,200 employees that we have. And everyone needs to come away from this with at least a basic understanding of how we determine their compensation, okay? And I think the #1 point to make here is, unfortunately, the amount of wiggle room we have for their salaries is very small. We essentially do not control our ability to pay these employees. Okay, I'll explain why. There is a state law known as the Commission on Industrial Relations. Now, public sector employees in Nebraska operate by a very interesting set of rules compared to everyone else in the nation. They aren't allowed to strike, and that's a good thing. Any of you who have lived through a teacher strike in another place know that that's probably a good thing to do. But in exchange for that to the employees, what our state law says is we're going to kind of narrow the range of negotiation over your salaries and benefits. What we're going to do is we're going to take a look at cities that have similar characteristics to your own, like size, that have similar job descriptions to your employees. We're going to take 7 of them or more, depending upon what group it is. We're going to take the midpoint of those salaries, and that is what we're going to pay you. Okay? Now, so negotiations with unions are much different than it is anywhere else in the world here. Okay? Because what it ends up being like is, say we're negotiating with the firefighters. All right? They come to the table and say, here are the 7 cities we chose for our array that we think determine comparability. And the midpoint of those cities shows that we're underpaid by 3%. We might come back and say, okay, we agree with 5 of those cities, but we think 2 of those are wrong. Here are the 2 cities we would use, and we think you're only entitled to 1%. And then you negotiate back and forth to close that gap. Okay? But there's another play in this. Let's say we can't come to agreement. And in the 1990s, we didn't come to agreement with the firefighters. That ends up before the Court of Industrial Relations, who basically settles the dispute for you. Okay? And they have the power to say to you, yeah, this is what you're paying. We agree with this array, not this. We agree with this piece, not that. So I need to make this really clear to you as you consider forward. A lot of us have talked about we really need to get a handle on retirement, other salaries and benefits, and that's great. And in the administration, the mayor has done a very good job of working with the unions to get them to see it was in their own interests to take less money than they were entitled to. And last year we had contracts that were consistently under what comparability was. But you can only do that for so long before then you get a big bill that you have to pay to get you caught up. Okay? So we're not necessarily completely in control of what we pay people. If we can go to the next one, please. Okay, quick slide on why our costs go up. Not really much different than why your household budgets go up. Inflation, the general cost of goods and services go up. Gas goes up. We burn about 1.1 million gallons of gas a year in the city. We talked about salaries and benefits. Let me tell you news you already know. Healthcare exceeds the rate of inflation. We pay some of this for our employees as a percentage, and that has increased costs for us. One thing that many people don't consider is since the utilities the city runs are fee-based, we can't just write that off. We pay that from our tax-funded portion, so when they go up, it costs us more money. When the gas company charges more, the telephone company charges more, Roadrunner wants a little more for the internet, we pay that too. Then, of course, our personal favorite in the director class, the mandates from the federal and state government. They do things or insist on things that cost us money, ways they want us to do business. And if we take the money from them, they have a way they want us to behave that generally is a little more expensive. Now, at this point, I was going to ask some of our directors to come up with examples, but in the interest of time, I think I'll move on. Okay, the mayor talked about the perfect fiscal storm. Here's where the rubber hits the road, folks. If we have only the revenue we had last year, which, frankly, we'll be lucky to have that with the trend lines that we have going down on our revenues and our costs going up, we think we'll have $135 million. And by the way, we've had a small error there. The anticipated amount is for the 9-10 budget, okay? Well, to maintain all the services we have with the cost increases that we're anticipating, we got to have $139 or $141 million, which means we got to cut $4 to $6 million of services to keep at that $135 million level. Because again, the trend lines are going in opposite directions. Our revenues are going this way, our costs are going this way. Okay, one of the ways that we've dealt with this and what's going to tie into what's going on today is we've developed an outcome-based budget. Okay? The mayor has switched us over to this in the past 2 years. Generally, government budgets are determined by what you spent last year. You take a look at what you spent last year, see what this year's revenues are, you take a percentage of that. That kind of drives the show. While it's still important in an outcome-based system, it's much more driven by what you want to accomplish with the amount of money that you have. So last year, as a start to this, we established 8 citywide goals: public safety, and effective transportation, environmental quality, healthy and productive people, Identity Lincoln, accountable government, livable neighborhoods, and there's one I always leave out. I'm up to 7. Anyone know what it is? No, the directors aren't paying attention. We'll get back to them later. Okay, so anyway, of those 7, we established those, and under each of those, then, we went ahead and put goals that we want to achieve. So, for instance, under public safety, we talked about maintaining a low crime rate. We talked about traffic safety. And under those goals, then, we implemented indicators to measure our progress towards achieving those goals. This is really an effort to make government more performance-based, okay? This is really important so that we know what we're doing is actually effective. Really important trend in government that's happening right now. Instead of just worrying about the money, we're worrying about the performance and where we need to shift funds. So those indicators, for instance, for traffic safety might determine how many crashes per 100,000 citizens is acceptable to us. Right now, I think it's about 850 per 100,000. Okay, thank you, Tom. And our program's successful then in keeping us at that performance measure, okay, is what we're doing on traffic safety, keeping us at that 850 per 100,000 crashes in the community, all right? In the crime rate, for instance, you just look at the number of people victimized by crime as a percentage. So we then, in this program, take a look at how the programs that we offer impact our outcomes and how we get there. Okay, so for instance, is the police, when they go ahead and write reports on non-injury accidents, how does that impact the crash rate? And is it getting us closer to our outcome of providing for traffic safety? That's how we evaluate the programs now under the system. So last year we did something a little bit unprecedented. We corralled all the directors, corralled some private sector people, and in each outcome, the 8 outcome areas, we brought the directors together in the same room, the outside city people and some of the private sector people, and we prioritized every single program the city offered based on how well it got us to those goals. Okay? How well did the program help us impact the indicators and get us to our goals? Okay? If you go to the next slide, Steve. And that led to a document which I think is over at this table, called Taking Charge, Program Prioritization, and Progress. And that's on the internet at lincoln.ne.gov. What we did is thank you for holding it up, appreciate that. What we did is we divided every program that we offer into 3 tiers. Tier 1 was the programs that best helped us, or were most important towards helping us achieve our goals. Tier 2 were the programs that were not as important, but still important to achieving our goals. Tier 3 obviously were important to helping us achieve our goals, just not as important as Tier 2 or Tier 1. Now, as you may imagine, when you're facing a 91% budget, something has to go. And so really, the Tier 3 services are in the most jeopardy of not making it, okay? Although it's serious enough that really some Tier 2 and Tier 1 will be in jeopardy as well. But the survey you took was the Tier 3 services. Those are the ones we put forward to you because they're in the most jeopardy of being left out of the 9-10 budget. That's the questions that you're going to consider today. How do we keep those, and what options we have in front of us for dealing with the situation? So you're basically going to be asked to cover 6 questions. 2 of them will be the same for every group. We're going to talk a little bit about snow removal and whether we're willing to allow more snow to pile up before we do something about it, or whether we're willing to pay more money. Now, while that isn't a tax-funded budget question, it's still a fairly important one and gives us some insight into your thinking about whether you're willing to make do with less or pay more, because that's one of the questions we really have to struggle with at our level. The other question you're going to take a look at is what I mentioned earlier, the police accident reports. Is this something that you want the police to continue to do? Okay, because that can be made up in other ways. So we're going to have you take a look at that and see, is this really something that you want us to do in terms of what it does for us in achieving our outcomes. Then there's going to be 4 other questions which you may or may not get to, depending upon how argumentative your groups are, that talk a little bit about other questions that we face as people trying to develop the budget. One of them is the neighborhood libraries. We have a quadrant system that has 5 of our main libraries, but then we support 5 other libraries that are a bit smaller and more neighborhood-based. That obviously has greater expense than having the larger libraries. And you face some of the choices we face in that matter. Do you pay more money to keep those? Do you shut them down entirely? Or do you cut hours at all the libraries, including the ones that are a little more efficient, to maintain that service. Okay, and that's something you'll be looking at. Then we have kind of an interesting question on what matters to you in terms of public safety. You know, we put police officers in our middle schools. And really, in terms of keeping those kids safe, it's great to have them there. But the question is it better for the crime rate to keep our recreation centers open? So our youth between the hours of 3 and 7 are off the streets and not committing crime during that time, or at least having positive interaction. You'll be asked to examine that question in some cases. We have a couple from our health department regarding child injury prevention and indoor air quality and the choices that go along with those in terms of keeping our air more breathable, especially in homes, and what we're doing to try to prevent accidents involving our children, and what you're willing to do or not do in maintaining a rate that's acceptable to you for government. So that's the question before you. I know we're way past time, and I apologize, Bill, but I went as fast as I could. Really appreciate you doing this today and look forward to hearing what you come up with. Thank you.